Hello, everybody. Welcome to Write Something Weird, your favorite literary show where we talk about creating cool art and building bookish communities. I'm Sophie Stern, a paranormal romance author in Kansas City, and I'm here today with my wonderful guest, Aimee Parkison. Hi, Aimee.
Hi, Sophie.
Really excited to have you on the show. Um, Aimee, you and I connected on Blue Sky, and I think it's so fun that that's how we met. I love social media as a way to find other artists and other creative people. Um, and one of the things that really drew me to you is that you have written so much and so many different things.
Yeah, I have. I'm getting to the point where I have around 10 or more books, if you count the chapbooks. I've also written some collaborative books too. So some of my books are co-authored, and in the true spirit of collaboration, we wrote stories together, we exchanged stories, and quite a few of my books are short story collections. Some of
Yeah,
them are full length, like longer stories, and some of them are focusing on flash and micro, like the compressed forms.
cool.
And I also do both realism and also anything that's not realism. So I love
Okay.
slipstream, I love cross genre, um, uh, speculative, weird fiction, horror, but usually some kind of a mix of this, so that's
Yeah.
kind of psychological. I like to blend things from different worlds, but always from typically a character-based perspective, voice perspective, or even a social justice-based perspective in terms of my newer work, in terms of the direction that it's going. But yeah, I've written many things partly because I go to so many different forms, but
Yeah.
also because I work in shorter forms so that
Mhm.
can get a lot done. And just how it is, the more you write, the longer you've been working. Like there's some projects that take a long time. You
Yeah.
put them to the side, you come back to them later. And then there's
Mhm.
other projects that go more quickly. So I'm always working on many things at once.
I love that. I'm the same way with my own writing, and I know some creators are like, I just write one thing at a time. I can't do that. I have to have a lot of different pots on the stove, as it were. So I do have a question for you. Body of evidence. This is something you wrote, and it's really cool. Can you tell us a little bit about Body of Evidence?
So it is a collection that's arranged in sections that are like case files. It deals with gendered violence, in particular violence against women, but
Mhm.
it crosses boundaries, blurring fiction and nonfiction. It
Yeah.
goes into personal character perspectives, but also in some ways it visits cultural, what I think of as cultural fairy tales, cultural warning
Yeah.
stories, cultural violences that we're familiar with. For instance, Weinstein, R. Kelly, Diddy, but also the Jogo Beach killer and several other things blended in, depending on which section, which case file, with also character based that I've created oftentimes as composite characters from research of
Okay.
actual cases where the names and maybe the crimes aren't as known. And
Mhm.
in particular, I'm focusing on the perspective of the survivors and the
Okay.
psychology of the survivors. My artistic theory in writing Body of Evidence was that avoiding actual explicit scenes of violence would make it more disturbing to the readers
Interesting.
because we're so desensitized to violence in
Mhm.
popular culture, video games, movies. So actually not showing the violence, but showing the aftermath of the survivors, I thought
Yeah.
would be more moving and more disturbing in a way because that's what we don't often see. We kind of just hear about the crime and then it goes away, or we
Yeah.
have more focus as a culture in telling the story of the aggressor rather
Yeah.
than the survivor.
That's really interesting. I like how intentional you were with this collection. And it sounds like you went into it really understanding the reader experience and what you wanted people who picked this up to kind of walk away with. Is that fair to say?
I think so. There was a lot of thought put into it. It did evolve over several years.
Cool.
There are micro narratives, so there are many, many different stories in here. It's flash, it's micro, and sort of collecting them and thinking about them and how they're coming together,
Yeah.
connected with this vision that my editor and I had of what the book might do and what it might be.
So that's a really interesting thing to bring up. I love working with editors, and I feel like a great editor can make your story collection or just even a single story so much stronger. What was that like working with your editor on this project?
But it was interesting because unlike most of my books, this one was bought on spec. It was,
Mhm.
you know, an idea. It was just a single set of short stories, maybe 10 pages or so. And my
Okay.
editor said, wouldn't this be great if this was a whole book of stories in
Okay.
conversation? So he said, you
Interesting.
know, let me put this under contract with the idea that you're going to write the book. I had
Yeah.
written a short piece for the anthology that he was working on, and he liked it so much that he was like, well, you know, can you write a whole book of these? And I thought, this is a subject that I've been thinking about so much. I wish I could write a book on it.
Yeah.
I just didn't actually think that I could do it. I didn't give myself
Yeah.
permission to do it until that
Mhm.
moment. My editor, by the way, is Patrick Davis at Unbound
Cool.
Edition Press, which
Okay.
is a press that publishes fiction, poetry, creative nonfiction, and it's an independent press. It focuses in particular on stories that are risky, stories that are perhaps often overlooked, and also experimental fiction and LGBTQ. So
Cool.
it's, you know, any of those categories that that press focuses on. It has a very particular mission. And I think that's partly why the book was so clear in my mind in terms of
Yeah.
the mission that I wanted the book to accomplish.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like when you're working with like a really good publisher like that, a really good team, you're able to, as you said, give yourself permission and kind of lean into the story a little bit more. A lot of times I think we tend to hold ourselves back, especially if we're writing speculative fiction or something a little weird or edgy. How do you avoid holding yourself back? How do you kind of lean into the weirdness or the unusual or the creative?
That's such a great question because that's one of my struggles. As much as I, you know, want to do certain things, there's always this kind of voice in the head that's like, well, you can't do this or that because people won't take it seriously,
Oh,
which is something that you have to kind of struggle against, or at least
yeah.
I have to as a writer.
Mhm.
And one of the ways that I do it is think about just really giving myself permission to write something that I'm not sure about and then going too
Oh,
far in the draft. And then if it works, it works. If it doesn't, I
yeah.
remind myself that I can always change it, delete it, erase it. Um, and this is one of the things I get into with my students in encouraging them to realize there's many drafts in writing a
Yeah.
piece. Like you revise it, it starts out as free writing, it goes on and you can
Uh-huh.
make experiments, you can take risk, especially realizing that it's a work in progress. So that's one of the things. Also, I just, you know, I realize reading my work sometimes when I'm looking at the drafts, some of the ones that are the best are the ones I trusted my intuition to just go for it, and some of the ones that don't work as well, they're too careful. So
Yeah.
that's another thing, like just getting perspective on it and looking back at places where I've made certain risks and thinking, okay, this was worth it. You know, this needs to go this way.
Yeah.
Although occasionally you take a risk, you do an experiment, and you see, oh, this was a disaster. This did not work. But that's fine too. That's part of the process. Not every single draft is the one that you send out that you end up with. And sometimes you
Yeah.
do throw things away, right? Sometimes
Yeah.
things don't work and you're like, okay, it didn't work. On to something else.
On to something else. Well, and I love thinking of writing as a process. I think a lot of times, especially newer writers, think, I'm going to write this story and then it's done. I'm going to write this book and then it's done. I think when you view it as a very lengthy process with many moving pieces, you can produce something a little bit better. And you can kind of give yourself that freedom to play.
Oh, definitely, definitely the revision process, but also thinking about the stages of it. I like to see it as a puzzle where you can mix things up. Like sometimes what you thought was the beginning is not the beginning. Sometimes
Yeah.
what's in the middle, you end up taking that as the beginning. It's, especially the longer a project gets, the more you can take chances with it and think, what happens if I completely reimagine this?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Um, and I like that you teach writing too, because I can tell how passionate you are about it. And I bet that you have a lot of fun with your students. Has working with students changed the way you approach writing?
I think so, because as much as I hope my students learn from me, I'm always learning from them,
Yeah,
even when, I didn't expect to. Like, there's certain questions that people raise or certain things that they say that I'm like, well, that's an interesting idea. I hadn't thought about it that way, and I'll
yeah,
rethink it. And sometimes just getting that conversation going, because my classes are more like discussions, they're more like
cool.
conversations, they're not really
Mhm.
lectures. So getting that conversation started, trying to think about it collaboratively in terms of the workshop being a place for
Mhm.
all of us, just the way certain people will phrase things, even if it's something that we already know or we think we know, just hearing it
Yeah,
in a different way will completely open up new avenues of ideas that we thought we already understood. Just hearing
yeah,
people say it in different ways based on their projects or their experience of what other people are writing. And also, how many times do we read something, we think we understand it, and then someone else reads the same thing and they read it in a completely different
yeah.
way? And then you
Mhm.
realize, wait a minute, both of these readings are valid and possible. So, what does this mean? Yeah, it's always opening up my mind and challenging me, which I think that's another part of it. Like, you want to be challenged. If you're not being challenged, your own writing can become stale or it can like
Yeah,
hit a wall. So one of the great things about the workshops, the classes I teach are that just, getting to be in that group and have those discussions and
yeah,
hearing what people have to say and realizing, even if it's not my writing, this is what I tell the class too, even if it's not your writing that we're talking about today, everything that we're talking about does apply to your writing too, because
yeah,
all these craft things, all these discussion points, you learn so much from talking about other people's writing, whether
yeah.
it's published writing or works in progress.
Absolutely. I used to teach creative writing to K through 12 students and then also to English as a second language students. And I don't
Wonderful.
think I had a single class where I didn't walk away with a new perspective on my own writing.
Yeah, it's such a beautiful thing to have that conversation and how
Yeah.
alive it is, right? Those workshops, those discussion classes where we're talking about works in progress and making things is
Mhm.
collaborative in terms of the discussion, but it's also very individual in terms of people's visions, goals, artistic
Yeah.
product. It's so alive in terms of what we're doing. It's ever changing, and as many years as you can spend teaching it and doing it,
Yeah.
there's always something new every single day.
I love that. And I agree. Like a good workshop is so beneficial to everyone who's attending, whether or not it's your story that's being analyzed. You can learn so much. What would you say to someone who was attending a workshop for the first time? What attitude should people bring to a workshop?
For the first time,
Hmm.
yeah, so that's a tricky one. One of the hardest things, especially, so I teach introduction to creative writing,
Cool.
and one of the hardest things is to get people to understand what a workshop is and why
Oh,
we
yeah.
do it. And then, what kinds, there's so many different types of creative writing and ways to be creative within writing. So one of the things that I tell them is that because it's a work in progress, it
Yeah.
has unlimited potential. So
Hmm.
don't immediately be discouraged when people point out things that need to change in the revision.
Yeah.
I also remind them that, and this is hard for people to understand sometimes, but when
Okay.
people only say, "Oh, this is great. I loved it so and so. This is perfect." That's actually not as kind of a response as someone who
Yeah.
says, "You know, I enjoyed this and that about it, but these particular things I'm not so sure about. What
Yeah.
would happen if this was this way? Or did you see on this page there's a point of view shift? And did you see on this particular page the character, behaves in a way that, contradicts what was set up in the characterization in the other page? Or maybe the narrative structure
Yeah.
doesn't seem to work, because that actually gives you something to go with. So a lot of it is the
Mhm.
constructive criticism. And I emphasize the idea of it being constructive. It's not just criticism, it's constructive because it allows you to build on something that you're already
Yeah.
creating and to make it better and eventually to finish it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that constructive criticism and that feedback is so important. And it really sets the stage too for the later relationships with editors and then at some point, external readers and reviewers of just being able to go, I made this, I think it's pretty good. And now other people are telling me that it can be even better.
Yes, yeah, that's another thing that's so important for them to understand. And I try to tell them from time to time, I'm doing the same thing. Like I have editors, I have,
Yeah.
various people telling me, okay, this is promising, but maybe this or this could be different, or what does this line mean? Or what
Yeah.
happens if we move this story over here? So there's all kinds of different levels to it, but we're
Mhm.
always exploring how to make it better. And also how as artists we deal with other people reading our work
Mhm.
and the
Yeah.
experience of hearing from them. Which is sometimes very exciting, but sometimes, you have to have a thick skin, because not
Yeah.
everyone is going to be the reader for your work. Not everyone's
Oh
going to
yeah.
appreciate it. And even those that do, especially if you're in process of writing it, will probably tell you there's things wrong with it, right? That's part of the
Yeah.
process. And as writers, we have to be able to take that in and to separate what's useful from what's not useful, but also be open to it and to be
Yeah.
open to changing things and to making them better when it's appropriate.
Absolutely. I think approaching writing with this idea of openness is really important. I think that can make all of us better writers, regardless of the type of writing that we're doing, for sure.
Absolutely.
So, when it comes to your short stories, do you currently attend workshops or do you usually work with editors? Do you have peers who read your short stories? What does that look like now for you?
It's a mix. I oftentimes work alone, but of course, you know
Oh,
how it is once something's under contract, then you get all
yeah.
this feedback, right? And at various
Mhm.
stages. Sometimes it's at the very end, sometimes they want the full manuscript before they'll
Yeah.
even look at it to consider it. And then you
Mhm.
get all these, like, sometimes they're mostly line edits at that point. But
Yeah.
then sometimes if you sell a project that's unfinished, then you have this collaborative thing where the editor has this idea of what it should be, and you kind of maybe show them different drafts. I also have quite a few friends and writer colleagues who
Yeah.
occasionally one of us will say, hey, I'm working on this. What are you working on? Do you want to
Mhm.
do an exchange?
Yeah.
And sometimes that's for feedback, but a lot of times it's for moral support and
Yeah.
accountability. So you
Mhm.
know how it is when you got a book project and you're by
Absolutely.
yourself. It's exhilarating, but it's also overwhelming at times, and it's easy to not make the progress that you might want to make, especially if you can procrastinate a lot, which sometimes I do. Having that accountability partner where we're saying,
Yeah.
okay, every week or every other week we're going to exchange a chapter or a story.
Yeah.
And sometimes there are like big groups that do this. I'm sure
Mhm.
you're familiar with this, but sometimes it's like, okay, the month of December, this particular group is going to get together, and no matter how long or short it is, good or bad it is, every single day we're going to try to post to this
Yeah.
discussion just to show we've
Love
written
it.
something every day.
Yeah.
And I love doing that kind of thing too. And of course, with the collaborative writing, when you do a collaborative story or a collaborative book, you're always going back and forth.
Yeah.
And nowadays with technology, it's so easy to do that with, Google Docs, email. You don't have
Yeah.
to be in the same place. Some of my collaborators, have lived in different states or even different countries, and yet we could talk all the time on Zoom, like you and I are doing right now.
Yeah.
And we could have, documents we're sending back and forth by email. We can cross edit on Google Docs. So it's a very exciting time right now to do collaborative work and to connect with people from all over. It's just a
Yeah.
very exciting experience, as you probably know from your own editorial collaborations.
Yeah. Yeah. I love I love collaborating with other authors, and I love having writer friends who write in all different genres and all different styles. Um, just for that moral support, like you mentioned, having the accountability of I have to work on this. Like maybe we can meet over Zoom and we'll silently type on our own projects, or
Oh yeah.
you get stuck on a line and your peer can be like, "What if you wrote it this way?" Or "What if a different character says that line?" I think having that feedback can be really helpful.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Yeah. Sometimes it makes all the difference. I find that I write so much
Yeah.
faster if I'm in one of those experiences. And I learn things even when we're not particularly invested in giving comments. Some of those are just like you said, we were typing together, whatever, just
Yeah.
showing each other what we've written afterwards. It can be so inspiring, like, oh, this person accomplished this in our 30-minute typing session. So therefore I could do, as many
Yeah.
words or, you know,
It's a
I
good
love that
feeling.
kind of thing.
Me too. It's great. Now, speaking of collaboration, I did see that you have a collection called Girl Zoo. Um,
Yes.
and it looks like that was a collaborative effort. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah, with Carol Guest, who she writes fiction and poetry. She
Cool.
reached out to me at one point and asked me if I wanted to write with her. And the interesting thing was I hadn't really met her yet, but I knew of her work and I was like, yes, I would be happy to do this. And she was
Cool.
very experienced in collaboration. Like I hadn't done that at this
Okay.
point. So she was able to kind of introduce me to that. And it was such an inspiring thing to do, to be connected with this project and to have these moments where we're exchanging things. Sometimes it's a call and response where, one of us would write a portion of a story and ask the other to finish it. And sometimes it was just like, here's pieces I've written. Would you send me some
Yeah.
you've written for the book?
I love that. And I think it must have been really nice too to have someone working with you in tandem, in the moment, like putting together this wonderful collection and to be invited, I think is pretty fun too.
Oh, yeah,
Um,
that was wonderful.
what was the most surprising thing about working on that collection together?
So there were several surprising things. First of
Okay.
all, just it goes a lot faster when you're collaborating because it's two people writing the book, but also it goes a lot faster to send the stories out because
Oh,
one person would send out this portion of the book, another this portion. So it just all of it happened very quickly. The book got finished, felt like quickly to me. I think it was about a year, but it also got accepted right away as a book, and the pieces got accepted very quickly in journals. And I think it's
cool.
because you have two minds working together, two people that
Yeah.
already have all this experience, but also it just felt so freeing because some of the voices that we created in certain stories were kind of challenging each other in a playful
Yeah.
way. Like we would
Cool.
do some stories that were footnoted, and sometimes the footnotes were like arguing with the other voice or
What?
questioning it. So it was
That's
just really
cool.
'cause it was also somewhat experimental in some of the stories and also speculative and feminist. But it was just a very fun, wild thing to do. We started
Yeah.
out by thinking, okay, what's a theme that both of us are interested in and feel
Mhm.
strongly about? And that's how we came up with the idea of women in captivity, and not necessarily literal captivity, but symbolic society captivity, like
Yeah.
the boxes that society puts women and girls in. Like, how do we explore that in different narratives ways?
Well, I love that you were able to approach that from so many different angles and put together this incredible collection that's very unique. And it sounds like it was such a great experience working
It
on that.
was. Thank you. Yeah, it was. It was a lot of fun. It's like one of those things that you just don't want it to ever end. Like, you don't
Oh,
want the
yeah.
project to be over.
Well, speaking of things that we don't want to end, as we wrap up this wonderful conversation, I do have one final question. You're very experienced in writing short fiction, and I think a lot of people really struggle with writing flash fiction or just short stories in general. So, can you share what you think is maybe the most important thing for a short fiction writer to know before they start, or just a piece of advice in general?
For Flash in particular,
Mhm.
The most important thing a fiction writer that wants to write flash fiction needs to do is read lots of poetry, especially
Ooh,
contemporary poetry, because
okay.
poetry does all the things that we try to do in flash fiction in terms of how compressed it is, how moving it is with the language, and how you get to the end of something that's very short, but you feel like you've gone on a whole journey and you want to read it again. So, flash fiction writers would be well served by
Okay.
reading lots of contemporary poetry and, of course, also lots of contemporary flash fiction as well, but mostly poetry.
Okay, I love that. Quick side note, my dear friend and I have been attending poetry readings so that we can become stronger writers and write lots of different things. So I love that that's your advice. I think a lot of writers would be well served to experiment with different types of fiction that they might not normally read because you can always learn something new.
Absolutely.
So, Aimee, this has been absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for joining me on the show. I really appreciate your time today.
Sophie, thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.
It was wonderful. Have a great rest of your day
Thank you, you
and happy
too.
writing.